The biggest mistake a person can make is believing dignity has a price tag. On a crisp Monday morning in downtown Chicago, the glass towers reflected a sky so clear it looked almost unreal, and the sidewalks buzzed with lawyers, executives, tourists, and office workers moving with practiced purpose through the financial district. Luxury sedans rolled quietly along polished streets while the aroma of fresh coffee drifted from busy cafes, creating the illusion that everything in the city followed an orderly rhythm. Evelyn Brooks walked through the crowd with calm confidence, dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, carrying nothing more than a slim leather portfolio and a smartphone resting silently in her hand. There was nothing flashy about her appearance despite the success she had earned over decades of relentless work. She preferred simplicity because real authority, she believed, never needed to announce itself. People who recognized her offered polite smiles, but she returned each greeting with the same quiet warmth before continuing toward the headquarters where one of the largest business mergers in Illinois was scheduled to be finalized before noon. Less than 15 minutes separated her from a meeting that could create thousands of new jobs across several communities, yet not once did she glance nervously at the time. She had learned long ago that composure often revealed more strength than urgency. Across the street, Officer Daniel Mercer leaned against his patrol vehicle, scanning pedestrians with the confidence of someone convinced he could read every stranger in seconds. His eyes moved past tourists, businessmen, and delivery drivers until they settled on Evelyn. Something about her presence immediately drew his attention, though he could not have explained why. Instead of seeing a respected executive preparing for one of the most significant mornings of her career, he allowed assumptions to fill the gaps where facts should have been. Without hesitation, he stepped into her path, his polished badge catching the morning sunlight as nearby conversations slowed almost instinctively. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you for a moment," he said firmly. Evelyn stopped, meeting his eyes with remarkable calm. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" Her voice carried neither fear nor irritation, only quiet curiosity. Around them, pedestrians continued walking, though several slowed enough to glance back. Mercer asked for identification in a tone that suggested the request was already a conclusion rather than a question. Evelyn reached slowly toward her portfolio, careful and respectful, but Mercer interrupted before she could remove anything. "Leave it where it is," he said. A faint silence settled over the sidewalk. A young courier paused beside a bike rack. A couple exiting a cafe exchanged uncertain looks. Someone several yards away instinctively lifted a phone, not to interfere but simply to record what seemed to be unfolding. Evelyn noticed every detail without acknowledging any of it. She simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. Her phone vibrated once. Then again. Then a third time. The screen briefly illuminated with incoming calls she ignored completely. Somewhere across the city, board members were undoubtedly wondering why their CEO had not yet arrived. Mercer never asked. He never noticed. He only saw the story he had already decided to believe. After a long pause, Evelyn spoke with the same steady voice she had used from the beginning. "Officer, I have an important meeting this morning. If there is a legitimate concern, I'll gladly cooperate." Mercer answered with visible confidence. "You'll stay right here until I figure out exactly who you are." Evelyn studied him for a brief moment, not with anger, but with the quiet sadness reserved for someone watching another person walk toward a consequence they cannot yet see. Then, almost gently, she replied, "Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't admitting you're wrong. It's realizing you never stopped to ask the right question." Evelyn Brooks remained exactly where she was, her posture relaxed, her expression unchanged, while the morning traffic continued flowing around them like a river finding its course around an unexpected stone. The financial district had seen countless business negotiations, public celebrations, and peaceful demonstrations over the years, yet this small circle forming on the sidewalk carried a different kind of tension. It was the quiet discomfort that appeared whenever people sensed something was not quite right but hesitated to become involved. Officer Daniel Mercer adjusted the radio on his shoulder before looking back at Evelyn with unwavering confidence. To him, every passing second reinforced the story he had already constructed in his own mind. He believed patience would eventually expose whatever he imagined she was hiding. Evelyn, however, showed no sign of frustration. She simply stood beneath the reflection of the towering office buildings, listening to the distant sounds of city buses, taxi horns, and construction crews several blocks away. Her phone vibrated again. The display briefly revealed the name of her executive assistant, followed by another incoming call from the board chair. She gently silenced both without even looking concerned. Across the street, inside the headquarters of Brooks Strategic Holdings, conference room lights were already glowing. Senior executives had gathered around a polished walnut table overlooking the Chicago River. Financial analysts organized reports while legal advisors quietly reviewed final documents. Everyone expected their chief executive to arrive within minutes because Evelyn had never missed an important meeting in 23 years of leading the company. Back on the sidewalk, a young woman carrying a visitor badge recognized Evelyn immediately. She slowed her pace, her eyes widening with surprise, but before she could approach, Mercer raised one hand, signaling everyone to keep moving. The woman hesitated for only a moment before stepping away, clearly uncertain whether intervening would help or make matters worse. More pedestrians began noticing the growing attention. Some whispered softly to one another. Others continued walking while glancing over their shoulders. Several phones were now visible, held naturally at chest level as people quietly documented what they believed was simply another public encounter. Mercer remained focused on Evelyn. "You seem awfully calm," he remarked. "Most people become nervous when an officer asks questions." Evelyn answered with the same measured tone. "Confidence and cooperation are not the same as fear." Her words were neither confrontational nor sarcastic. They carried the quiet certainty of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions under enormous pressure. Mercer folded his arms. "We will decide that after we verify everything." Evelyn nodded politely. "Then I hope the process is fair." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet those nearby felt the contrast between them growing stronger. Mercer relied on authority that came with the uniform he wore. Evelyn relied on something far less visible, a lifetime of discipline that refused to let another person's assumptions dictate her character. A cool breeze swept through the avenue, lifting loose newspapers along the curb as clouds drifted slowly across the skyline. The city itself seemed to pause between moments. Then, from several yards away, a black sedan quietly pulled toward the curb before stopping without urgency. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out, looking first toward the office tower, then toward the small gathering on the sidewalk. His expression shifted the instant he recognized Evelyn standing beside the patrol vehicle. He did not rush forward or raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his jacket, removed his phone, and placed a single call while never taking his eyes off the scene unfolding before him. Evelyn noticed him only briefly, offering the smallest almost imperceptible nod before returning her attention to Officer Mercer, whose confidence remained completely untouched by the realization that events were beginning to move beyond anything he had anticipated. Evelyn Brooks watched the man in the charcoal suit finish his phone call before quietly slipping the device back into his pocket, and although neither of them exchanged another glance, years of professional trust required no words between them. The city continued moving as though nothing unusual had happened, yet the atmosphere around the intersection had changed. More people had slowed their pace. Some pretended to study storefront windows while discreetly observing the encounter. Others stood outside coffee shops holding paper cups that had long since stopped steaming, their attention fixed on the calm woman facing the officer without raising her voice. Daniel Mercer noticed the growing audience but interpreted it as silent approval. Experience had convinced him that confidence often discouraged questions, and he carried himself with the certainty of someone who believed his judgment would never be challenged. He stepped slightly closer and spoke in an even but unmistakably authoritative tone. "Until I complete my inquiry, you are not free to leave." Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation. "Officer, I have remained here voluntarily from the beginning." Mercer gave a brief nod. "That is the smart decision." She answered with a faint, polite smile that revealed neither agreement nor resentment. "Sometimes patience serves everyone better than assumptions." Her words lingered in the cool morning air. Nearby, the young courier who had stopped earlier quietly lowered his bicycle onto its kickstand instead of riding away. An elderly couple sitting outside a nearby bakery exchanged concerned looks. A rideshare driver parked at the curb rolled down his window slightly, sensing that something important was unfolding even if he could not yet understand why. Inside Brooks Strategic Holdings, the atmosphere had become noticeably different. The scheduled merger meeting had not begun. Senior executives checked the clock repeatedly while Evelyn's executive assistant, Rachel Collins, attempted another call that once again went unanswered. Rachel knew Evelyn well enough to recognize that silence was never accidental. She immediately contacted the company's chief legal officer, Thomas Bennett, explaining only that their chief executive had disappeared less than 2 blocks from headquarters on her normal walking route. Thomas did not waste a second. He instructed the Security Operations Center to review live exterior camera feeds covering every entrance surrounding the building. Within moments, multiple monitors displayed the same sidewalk where Evelyn remained standing beneath the mirrored towers. Every movement was being recorded from different angles. Back outside. Mercer requested identification once again. Evelyn slowly removed a slim leather card holder from her portfolio exactly as instructed. She held it calmly without extending it. "May I hand this to you now?" she asked. Mercer nodded. She offered the identification with steady hands, her movements careful and respectful. He examined the card only briefly before lowering it again. Instead of recognizing the name immediately, he focused on confirming the photograph. The title beneath her name barely registered in his mind because he had already convinced himself that the answer he wanted would eventually appear elsewhere. Evelyn observed his expression without interruption. She had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar agreements, resolving corporate crises, and leading thousands of employees through uncertain times. She understood that once a person became committed to a mistaken conclusion, facts often arrived too late to change first impressions. Across the street, the man in the charcoal suit quietly received another call. This time he answered immediately. "Yes," he said calmly. "She is exactly where the cameras show. She remains completely cooperative." He listened for several seconds before replying, "Understood. We will let the situation unfold exactly as it is." As he ended the conversation, the distant sound of approaching vehicles blended into the rhythm of downtown traffic. No flashing lights interrupted the morning. No voices were raised. Yet an invisible chain of decisions had already begun moving through offices, conference rooms, and command desks across the city, while Officer Daniel Mercer remained unaware that every minute he prolonged the encounter was quietly expanding a story far larger than the one he believed he controlled. The quiet tension on the sidewalk continued to deepen as though the entire block had begun holding its breath. Officer Daniel Mercer handed Evelyn Brooks's identification back without any visible change in his expression, apparently convinced that the brief glance had confirmed nothing beyond her name and photograph. He never asked about the company listed beneath her title, never questioned why someone dressed for a board meeting carried herself with such effortless composure, and never wondered why she had shown complete respect from the very beginning. Instead, he looked beyond her toward the growing number of curious onlookers. "Please keep moving," he called firmly. Most obeyed, but not before taking one last glance or quietly lowering the phones that had already preserved nearly every moment of the encounter. Evelyn accepted her identification with the same calm dignity she had displayed since the first question. She placed it carefully back inside the leather holder before resting both hands lightly on her portfolio. Her breathing remained steady. Her shoulders never tensed. Years spent leading difficult negotiations had taught her that emotions could cloud judgment, while patience often revealed far more than confrontation ever could. Mercer shifted his weight and spoke again. "Who are you meeting this morning?" Evelyn answered honestly. "Members of my executive leadership team." "Where?" he asked. She turned slightly toward the gleaming tower only half a block away. "Right there." Mercer glanced at the building before returning his attention to her with unmistakable skepticism. "Do you expect me to believe that?" Evelyn simply replied, "Whether you believe it does not change the truth." The answer drew another wave of quiet whispers from several people nearby. A middle-aged accountant leaving an office building paused beside a newspaper stand and looked carefully at Evelyn before his eyes widened with recognition. He whispered something to a colleague, who immediately searched her phone. Within seconds both exchanged startled expressions but wisely remained silent. Across the street, Thomas Bennett arrived outside Brooks Strategic Holdings accompanied by Rachel Collins and the company's director of corporate security. None of them hurried. They observed the situation through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows while reviewing multiple live camera feeds displayed on a tablet. Every angle confirmed the same thing. Evelyn had remained respectful throughout the encounter. Every request had been answered calmly. Every movement had been deliberate. Thomas quietly nodded. Preserve every recording, he instructed. From every camera beginning 15 minutes before Officer Mercer made contact. Rachel looked toward the sidewalk, concern visible in her eyes. Should we go out there? Thomas considered the question before answering softly. Not yet. She has chosen patience for a reason. Back outside, another call reached Evelyn's phone. This time the display showed Thomas Bennett. She allowed it to ring before silencing it once again. Mercer noticed. You seem very comfortable ignoring your calls. Evelyn smiled FAI. Thomas Bennett continued watching the live camera feeds without speaking, his eyes moving carefully between each angle as the security team archived every second of footage. Nothing appeared dramatic to an outsider. There were no raised voices, no frantic movements, no scene that would dominate an evening news broadcast. Instead, the recordings captured something far more revealing. They showed a woman answering every question with respect while valuable minutes quietly disappeared from a day that thousands of employees had spent preparing for. Inside the executive conference room, the directors of Brooks Strategic Holdings remained seated around the long table. Financial projections rested unopened. Contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars waited beside untouched coffee cups that had already grown cold. Rachel Collins entered the room and quietly informed everyone that the meeting would be delayed until further notice. No one complained. Every executive in the room trusted Evelyn Brooks completely. If she had not arrived, there had to be a reason beyond anyone's imagination. Back on the sidewalk, Officer Daniel Mercer checked the time before speaking again. I have asked several simple questions. This could have ended already. Evelyn answered with the same calm expression. Sometimes the longest delays come from the quickest assumptions. Mercer frowned slightly, uncertain whether she intended the remark as advice or criticism. Before he could respond, another vibration echoed from Evelyn's phone. This time the display showed the name of the chairman of the board. She glanced at the screen for only a moment before silencing the call once more. Mercer noticed her restraint. You really do not seem worried about missing important conversations. Evelyn looked toward the office tower where sunlight reflected across the glass facade. The people calling me know I will answer when the right moment arrives. A few feet away, the accountant who had recognized Evelyn earlier quietly approached the young courier standing beside the bicycle rack. Do you know who she is? He whispered. The courier shook his head. Without saying another word, the accountant opened a business magazine article on his phone. A large photograph of Evelyn appeared beside the headline announcing her recognition as one of the nation's most influential corporate leaders. The courier stared at the image, then slowly looked back toward the woman standing peacefully beside the patrol vehicle. His expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. Neither man interrupted. They simply watched as the reality unfolding before them became increasingly difficult to ignore. At police headquarters, the forwarded videos had reached the desk of Deputy Chief Michael Reynolds. He viewed each clip carefully, replaying them several times before requesting additional information. Within minutes, another staff member quietly placed a printed executive profile on his desk. Reynolds compared the profile photograph with the woman appearing in the recordings. There was no mistake. He reached for his office phone and placed a direct call to Chief Robert Whitmore. Chief, he said evenly, I believe you need to see something immediately. Across downtown Chicago, the man in the charcoal suit received another brief message. He looked toward Evelyn, saw that her composure had never changed, and typed only 4 words in reply. She is still waiting. The response came almost instantly. Do not intervene yet. Evelyn remained exactly where she had been since the encounter began, allowing silence to accomplish what arguments never could. She understood that character revealed itself most clearly when someone believed no one important was watching. What Officer Daniel Mercer could not possibly know was that dozens of people were now watching, each from a different place, each seeing the same encounter through different eyes, and each arriving at the very same conclusion before he had even realized the story was no longer under his control. SUA Chief Robert Whitmore was halfway through a budget briefing when Deputy Chief Michael Reynolds quietly entered the conference room carrying a tablet instead of the usual stack of reports. One look at Reynolds's expression was enough to interrupt the discussion. Whitmore excused himself and stepped into the hallway where the tablet was already displaying the first video recorded outside Brooks Strategic Holdings. Neither man spoke while the recording played. They watched Officer Daniel Mercer questioning a composed woman who answered every request. Why? Officer Daniel Mercer slowly lowered the radio from his shoulder after acknowledging the dispatcher, but the confidence that had defined his voice throughout the morning no longer sounded quite the same. Around him, the city continued moving with its usual rhythm, yet the sidewalk had fallen into an almost complete silence. Even the people who had intended to leave now remained where they were, sensing that the story unfolding before them had quietly crossed an invisible line. Evelyn Brooks stood exactly as she had from the beginning, her leather portfolio resting comfortably at her side. She neither celebrated the sudden change in tone nor appeared relieved. She simply waited, believing that truth rarely needed assistance once it finally found the right audience. Less than 3 minutes later, two unmarked black sport utility vehicles rolled smoothly to the curb without flashing lights or unnecessary urgency. Their arrival drew every eye on the block. The doors opened, and several professionally dressed officials stepped onto the sidewalk. Thomas Bennett immediately recognized Deputy Chief Michael Reynolds, followed by representatives from the department's Office of Professional Standards. Behind them, Chief Robert Whitmore emerged from the second vehicle. He walked calmly, acknowledging no one until his eyes settled on Evelyn. For a brief moment, the entire street seemed frozen. Whitmore approached with measured steps before extending his hand. "Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully, "I apologize for the delay." Evelyn accepted the handshake with quiet grace. "Thank you for coming, Chief." That single exchange transformed the atmosphere more completely than any argument ever could. Mercer remained motionless. His eyes moved from the chief to Evelyn and back again as the realization finally reached him that the woman standing before him was not simply another passerby. Chief Whitmore turned toward Mercer without raising his voice. "Officer Mercer, I would like a complete explanation of this encounter." Mercer immediately began describing the events as he remembered them, emphasizing that he believed he was performing his duties responsibly. Whitmore listened without interruption, occasionally glancing toward Reynolds, who was already reviewing synchronized recordings from traffic cameras, nearby businesses, and public surveillance systems on the tablet in his hands. Every timestamp matched. Every recording confirmed the same sequence. Evelyn had answered respectfully. She had remained cooperative. She had made no attempt to leave. She had offered identification when requested. She had shown patience at every stage of the encounter. Reynolds quietly handed the tablet to the chief. Whitmore watched another short clip before returning it. His expression remained professional, but disappointment replaced curiosity. He looked back toward Mercer. "The evidence speaks very clearly." Nearby, Thomas Bennett stepped forward only after receiving a slight nod from Evelyn. "Chief," he said calmly, "our building security system preserved multiple camera angles beginning before initial contact. We will gladly provide every recording requested by your department." Whitmore nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. We will include every available source." Several bystanders exchanged astonished looks as whispers spread through the crowd. The accountant who had recognized Evelyn earlier quietly explained to others that she had led one of the largest employers in the state for more than 2 decades. The young courier stared toward Evelyn with newfound admiration, realizing that despite everything, she had never once introduced herself by her title or attempted to use her influence to end the situation. She had allowed her character to speak first. As another gentle breeze moved between the glass towers, Evelyn finally looked toward Officer Mercer with neither anger nor satisfaction in her eyes. "I told you earlier," she said softly, that the right question matters more than the quickest conclusion. Mercer lowered his gaze, saying nothing. For the first time that morning, the badge on his uniform no longer seemed like the strongest authority standing on that sidewalk. Integrity had quietly taken its place. The silence that followed Chief Robert Whitmore's final words carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Officer Daniel Mercer remained standing on the sidewalk, surrounded not by accusation but by undeniable facts. Deputy Chief Michael Reynolds continued reviewing the synchronized recordings, carefully comparing timestamps from city traffic cameras, nearby businesses, Brooks Strategic Holdings security systems, and the videos recorded by ordinary people who had happened to witness the encounter. Every source aligned with remarkable precision. Each angle told the same story from a different perspective. There were no missing minutes, no conflicting accounts, and no uncertainty about the sequence of events. Evelyn Brooks had answered every question respectfully. She had remained patient despite repeated delays. She had never attempted to provoke, evade, or escalate the situation. The evidence formed a complete picture long before anyone needed to debate it. Chief Whitmore looked toward Mercer with measured professionalism. "Officer, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending a formal administrative review." Mercer blinked, absorbing the words in stunned silence. Whitmore continued without emotion. "You will surrender all department-issued equipment according to procedure and report to Internal Affairs as instructed." The statement was delivered calmly, yet everyone nearby understood its significance. Mercer slowly nodded. "Yes, Chief." For the first time that morning, certainty had disappeared from his voice. Thomas Bennett quietly stepped beside Evelyn. "The board has postponed the merger meeting until you are ready," he said softly. Evelyn smiled with genuine appreciation. "Please thank everyone for their patience." Rachel Collins approached a moment later carrying Evelyn's tablet and a folder that had been prepared for the meeting. "Everything has been rescheduled," she assured her. "No one wanted to continue without you." Evelyn accepted the folder with quiet gratitude before turning her attention back toward Chief Whitmore. "Chief, I appreciate the professionalism your leadership has shown today." Whitmore nodded respectfully. "Ms. Brooks, accountability matters because public trust matters. We will complete a full review of everything that occurred." Over the following days, investigators examined every recording, radio transmission, written report, and witness statement connected to the encounter. The review concluded that departmental policies had not been followed appropriately, and the findings resulted in serious administrative consequences. Officer Mercer separated from the department through established procedures before reaching retirement eligibility, bringing an unexpected end to the career he had expected to finish on his own terms. The financial security he had planned for over decades changed dramatically because one morning of poor judgment had altered the course of everything that followed. News of the incident spread throughout the city, yet the conversations that endured were not focused on punishment alone. Community leaders, business organizations, and law enforcement officials began discussing the importance of fairness, professional judgment, and treating every person with equal dignity regardless of appearance or assumption. Brooks Strategic Holdings later partnered with civic organizations to sponsor leadership programs centered on trust, ethical decision-making, and constructive relationships between communities and public institutions. When reporters eventually asked Evelyn whether she felt vindicated, she paused before answering. "Justice is never about humiliating another person," she said. "It is about making certain that the next person is treated with greater fairness than the last." Those words traveled farther than any headline. People remembered the woman who never introduced herself by her title, never demanded special treatment, and never allowed anger to replace dignity. They remembered that true authority had arrived quietly, carried by character instead of status. And many who had watched that ordinary Monday morning unfold came away with the same unforgettable lesson. A reputation may take decades to build, but one moment of unquestioned assumption can cost far more than anyone ever imagines. Several weeks later, life in downtown Chicago had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Morning commuters once again filled the sidewalks before sunrise, coffee shops welcomed their regular customers, and the mirrored towers reflected another season of opportunity across the skyline. To most people passing through the financial district, the corner where everything had unfolded looked no different from any other intersection in the city. Yet for those who had witnessed that morning, it had become a quiet reminder that every decision made in public carries consequences that often reach far beyond the moment itself. Evelyn Brooks never returned to that sidewalk searching for recognition. She had no interest in becoming a symbol or a headline. Instead, she returned to the work she believed mattered most, expanding businesses that created jobs, investing in neighborhoods too often overlooked, and mentoring young professionals who dreamed of leading with both confidence and compassion. During one leadership conference several months later, a university student asked her what she had been thinking while standing on that sidewalk for nearly an hour without losing her composure. The auditorium became silent as hundreds of people waited for her answer. Evelyn smiled gently before speaking. Every person eventually faces a moment when someone else decides who they are before learning their story. In that moment, you cannot control another person's assumptions. You can only control your own character. The audience remained silent for several seconds before rising in a standing ovation that lasted far longer than her brief answer. Among those listening that afternoon were business executives, community leaders, educators, police officers, and young cadets preparing for careers in public service. Many later admitted that her words stayed with them long after the conference had ended because they spoke not about victory over another person, but about responsibility to one another. Chief Robert Whitmore also remembered that Monday morning. The department expanded additional training focused on communication, professional judgment, and recognizing the importance of evaluating facts before forming conclusions. New officers studied the incident not to shame anyone involved but to understand how easily confidence without reflection could become costly. The lesson was never about one individual. It was about protecting the trust that every community deserves from those who serve it. As for Daniel Mercer, the unexpected ending of his career gave him something he had rarely allowed himself before: time for honest reflection. The retirement he had imagined disappeared, but another opportunity remained, the opportunity to examine the choices that had brought him to that point. Some losses cannot be reversed, yet every person still chooses what they learn after facing them. That lesson belonged to him alone. Years later, people would remember many details differently. Some would remember the cameras. Others would remember the arriving officials or the unexpected silence that settled across the sidewalk. But almost everyone remembered the same image above all else: a woman who never raised her voice, never demanded special treatment, never allowed another person's assumptions to define her worth, and proved that dignity remains strongest when it refuses to disappear under pressure. Because in the end, authority can open a conversation, but character determines how history remembers it. A badge may command attention for a moment, a title may command respect for a season, but integrity earns trust for a lifetime. And on one ordinary Monday morning in Chicago, the most powerful voice belonged not to the loudest person on the sidewalk, but to the quiet truth that patience, fairness, and dignity will always outlast prejudice.